is Jyotsna Hegde with NRI Pulse. Our guest today is no stranger to the community.
Archith Seshadri is an engineer turned global journalist and TV host based in Atlanta. He serves as the Atlanta bureau chief and anchor for Nexstar Media Group, reporting for stations across the Southeast U.S. Archith has navigated many newsrooms over the years, including CBS, ABC, Fox, and CNN. Archith has also moved to New Delhi, India for a couple of years, where he served as an anchor for WION, a subsidiary of Zee Media. He has appeared in Pyramid, ABC's popular primetime game show, teaming up with rapper Snoop Dogg.
Besides being a journalist, he's a food blogger, actor, fitness enthusiast, and yoga teacher. Archith, it's truly a pleasure to talk to you today. Welcome.
Thank you, Jyotsna. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Pleasure to be back on with NRI Pulse. Grateful to be here, and thank you for connecting and being able to share the story.
Absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, there are multiple facets to your, let's say, ever evolving personality, and with your initiatives and your enthusiasm, you're constantly reinventing yourselves, broadening your horizons, both professionally and personally. But today we are here today to focus on one of the personal aspects that you recently revealed to the world, and that is your orientation as a gay man, and its broader implications on acceptance, authenticity, and also about just being vulnerable. So let's get right to it. Archith, let's begin by understanding you a little bit more. Tell us about yourself and your family.
Absolutely. So I grew up in India. I was born in Madras, now known as Chennai. I lived in Bombay till I was about 7, and then my parents migrated to Australia. So we lived there for another 7 years. So it seemed like every 7 years we were moving. So India was 7, Australia was 7, and then we moved to the United States 25 years ago. So it's been a whirlwind of a ride. I think if I look back and I say, is this how my life would be or have evolved? I would have never been, but I'm very thankful and grateful for the way it has, because I think if you just kind of take it one day at a time and appreciate opening those little gifts that are along the way, I think you just end up being a little bit more excited. It's like I love motivational and inspirational quotes, and I try my best to live with 3 words: positivity, inspirational, and energetic. Like those are words that naturally gravitate towards me. And I hear that from people, and I try to embody that, because I think when you sit there looking at things through a positive lens, and if you inspired and want to inspire someone, and always come in with a good dose of energy, I think that's what most of us want, most of us crave, and that's how you ultimately create happiness. And you want to be a pleasure to be around. So nobody wants to go around someone who's always whining or complaining or talking about the negatives, because we can sit there and do that. But I always like using the word flip the switch and find the nuggets, the gems that are there, instead of looking at the things that didn't go right. So moved here in 1998. I've always been in Atlanta. It's a funny story. We missed both the Olympics, both Atlanta 96 and Sydney 2000. So have lived here in Alpharetta, grown up here, went to high school, went to Georgia Tech, went to college, worked here. So Atlanta is home. So whenever people ask, where are you from? I said, well, lived the longest in Atlanta. But as you mentioned earlier in the introduction, when I say global journalist, I feel like I'm a global citizen, because living in so many different parts of the world and going to so many different schools comes with the pros and the cons, right? It's like you don't have the same group of friends or the same curriculum or things like that. But going back to flipping the switch, you're exposed to so many different people and styles and personalities and histories of different parts of the world. And I think that sort of molds in with you. And last year, 2022, January, I had shared about coming out. And I think it's important, especially in the world that we live in now, in a pandemic world. Luckily, getting towards an endemic. But I think it gives us a reality check of, listen, all of our timelines at some point will run out. But I think it's, and I read a quote that said, if you live your life fully and you live it optimistically and just have fun and just go live, doing life once is more than enough. And I think that's what it should all be for all of us. So I think, this is a small element of my life. It doesn't define my life. And I think in the South Asian, the Indian culture especially, we don't want to label someone based on one incident. Maybe they had an accident, maybe they had a divorce, maybe they were adopted. I think those are just elements. There are more, 7+ billion people of us on planet Earth. And the beauty of it is because we all come from so many different cultures, background, religion, race, height, interests, all of those things. If we all were the same, it would be kind of a boring world. Despite all these differences, I think the beauty is that we're all human beings. The pandemic showed us that. Whether you're Black or white, Asian or Latino, COVID is not going to stop you, right? So I think looking at that through that lens and being able to vulnerably share, and especially as a journalist, I felt that it was important to share your own story. I think you're covering and interviewing people and talking to the world about politics, healthcare, pop culture, all of that. But if you don't share your own story, I think it is a bit of a disservice. And again, going back to what I said about flipping the switch, I don't want it to be as a victim card or, oh, feel bad for me. I think, no, this is an element and use it as you may wish. Maybe this will inspire you to talk to someone about your own challenges in your relationship, whether, LGBT, straight, whatever that is. Or maybe if you're trapped in an unhealthy relationship, this could be the ammo to be like, you know what? Life is too short. And you can sometimes love someone and still walk away with it. I think learning to take courageous steps to control your life, I think. And I think I've done that with both my career and my life choice. And I think there's still a lot to learn and evolve. I don't think it's by any means, people ask, oh, you've evolved. I'm like, I think we are constantly evolving as human beings. So I think it's just be you, be authentic. And if you don't write your story, who will? Who's going to know who you are? Who knows Jyoth better than Jyoth now? Who knows Archith better than Archith, right? So I think coming back to really being vulnerable and sharing your own unique self so people don't assume and people just don't wait around guessing.
Archit, that's so most people want to know this. Did you always know, that this was your orientation, but or did you, was there a point in time when you said, hey, I know for sure, I'm not sure, did you have doubts about that? And was there something, what trigger, when did you know, and how did you decide that this is who I am, and this is how I'm going to accept myself to be?
I think that's an important question. And I think everyone's own timeline is so different. And I think part of that is innate. I think part of that is also societal, and the culture and where you grow up, what part of the world you live in, because some places it's much easier, much more accepting. I will say this, the generation that we live in now, the world that we live in is so much more accepting, at least in the United States. I don't know about other parts of the world, again, in this sort of boat, but I would say probably much more into my 30s, as opposed to much earlier. I think for some people, they just know right away. For some people, you just don't think about it. So I'll give my example because I can comfortably talk about my story and my journey. And when you're younger, it's always like get good grades, study, go to school. And it's like this formulaic process that's given to you. These are the cards that you have to be played. And like, you put your
Especially
head
in the
down.
Indian American families.
Exactly. And you never talk about relationships or dating or marriage. And it's just, at least for a traditional South Indian Tamil Brahmin family, right?
Yeah.
It's just not there. And again, I don't say that's right or wrong. It's just the way you've been
It is just the
accustomed
way it
to.
is. Yeah.
So I think living abroad definitely opened up some of those horizons. I think there might have always been curiosities or thoughts, but then you kind of brush it aside, like, oh, maybe it's just a phase, or maybe it's just, you're confused kind of thing. Really, I would say the last 5 years, especially when it was more about you would see your parents set you up with people and you didn't feel the chemistry or the connection. And I do a lot of yoga and I do a lot of improv, and all of that has been the last yoga the last 5 years, improv the last 8 years or so. And in both of those, there are elements of those that I use in my life, and I think that has helped sort of accepting and making decisions. So improv and acting is you always make strong choices. It's, do you like red or blue? Do you like green or white? Do you like pani puri or do you like dosa? Like make a decision, right? So in this, do you like boys or girls, or do you like in your South and whatever that is, and understand why. And maybe it's both, you don't know, right? But making a choice and owning that choice. And in yoga, a lot of it is away from your phone, self-reflective and healing, and really figuring out who you are, right? Because sometimes we don't pay attention to that. We're just so busy. So I think these other elements helped funnel a decision and being able to not only, I think it's like a process, right? It's like you figure it out and you deal with it, go through the motions. I mean, there were many, many nights you feel a level of guilt, and I would go to bed like crying, like, oh, what's wrong? Why am I like this? I'm a good human being. Why have I felt like I'm being punished? And I think it was more the pandemic where it was more like, well, that's only because you put this as a label or something as a bad thing. And I think when you flip that and think, oh, this is not a bad thing, you can be this and that's fine. Like being this is not a crime or a flaw. So I think that really made it much more easier to accept, like, oh, I've been looking at this through the wrong lens. And I think that's it. I think, recently Cal Penn also shared his thing and he didn't realize till he was much later. So I think people's own journey and process are different. I think things happen to you when you are mentally strong to handle that. I don't think it's like, oh, some people may know when they're 10, some people may know much later. And my biggest light bulb moment was like, I'm not going to do this, even if there's an inclination, or ruin somebody else's life by getting married and being like, oh, you know what? Because then you're in a much more trickier situation. There's two lives involved. And there's no rat race. There's no, more and more gifts to keep opening. And I think if you just keep looking at it and keep moving forward, just like Martin Luther King said, just keep looking for it. And I think there's beauty in that. And I think that's how that journey evolved. So I would say within the last 5 years, again, I don't have an exact date per se, but I would say much more into my 30s. But yeah, I think that's a weird win of the pandemic.
And then,
also, things, but there are good things too.
Yeah, of course. And, also being, the traditional, as it is, we are an Indian American family, but then also being Tamil, Brahmin, which is extremely conservative and traditional. I think, how did that play out for you? I mean, in just accepting yourself more than anybody else.
Yeah. I think even now, right, for most people, and I think
your parents like this too, in accepting you, for that matter.
I don't think they haven't fully, I think, grasped it, but I think it's also like a learning curve for them, right? Because it took me so long, and they're obviously raised in India, and they've lived here, outside of India for a good amount of their lives. I think it's everyone is on their own. It's like, I'll give this example of, like, if you give a child a lesson, there's many ways to teach that child that lesson, right? Some people are strict at it, some people are rewarding it. There's many ways to still teach a child how to learn certain things. Everyone has a different way to learn, absorb things. My biggest lesson out of this is don't care what people think. That should be everybody's lesson in anything you do, because people will always have an opinion. And somebody said, right, if there are 1,000 people's opinions, they're all different. Can you please 1,000 people? Probably not. But you can please the people that are close to you, yourself especially. And then as long as you're not harming or hurting anyone, I don't think it matters. So I think for them, it's, we recently went to an LGBT wedding here, which was nice. I think opening up the layers like an onion layers for them is also important. And I told my brother first, which was nice. And I always wanted to talk. I think you just have to find the right time and the right space and the right intention. I think when you live with a little bit of intention of why and when, and finding the authentic, organic way to tell it is the best way. Being I wouldn't say apologetic, just being who you are. Because I say, like, for people who are straight, you don't have to come out again and again. So why is that? And I really hope someday there isn't this whole thing about coming out. Like, what am I coming out of? A pandemic? I don't know. Like, people always ask that. And I said, that's the most. Sometimes people will be like, oh, tell me about your story. And I was like, just read the article. Like, at this point, how many times you repeat the story? Just feel like it gets exhausting. Because when you're straight, you don't have that, like, oh, how long have you known? When you like, you don't say that, right? So why is this? I think sometimes there's such a difference in, especially being in the world that we live in, right? Whether it's media and entertainment, or when people feel like they know you through either seeing you in the public or through social media. And I think Vidya Balan has said this, and I love the line. It says, just because someone is a public figure, that doesn't mean they're public property. Not everyone wants to share every element and detail about their life, especially over and over again. I think it's, if you are maybe going through it, or if you're maybe someone, you want to know how to handle it, that's a different thing. But it's like, oh, hey, tell me what's happening with your love life. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't think it's a very personal thing for everybody. So I think it's just being mindful and respectful of someone. If they want to, I think they will. And in any decision, whether that's divorce, whether that's a career, whether that's salary. I mean, I remember when I worked at Accenture, when I was in consulting, I've had cousins in India said, how much do you make? And it's like, wow, like, why does that matter? and I would just give them a ballpark or a range. And even then, I think you just have to learn to know how to answer some people. But the bigger lesson, I would say, is learn what questions to ask. Just ask
that's
questions.
The thing too, Archith. So that's the point that I think most of us want to know, especially what is it that one person can do, and they're really, let's say it's your own family member or your very close friends. they want to be supportive of everything, but then you don't know what to say that would hurt you or not. So is there like a do's and don'ts list, so to speak, that you would have, that that would put the person at ease, and not even peace, I would say normalize it, not yeah. So what would be the most comfortable thing for a person who really cares to do?
I think just
Or maybe
listening to
you can tell
someone
us
is the
the
most.
don'ts, maybe the don'ts are more important than the do's.
I think they both are equally as important. I would say the don'ts are, let's start with the optimist in me. We'll start with the do's and we'll get to the don'ts. But the do's are just listen to someone, because sometimes, people just want someone to listen to ultimately, right? They just want and someone to have an ear out, to get perspective. And I think that's a very important thing, without any level of judgment or anything, and saying, oh, well, again, log kya kahenge, what people think. That is one line that we should all control, alt delete out of our equation, because don't worry what people think. Like, people might be like, why are you doing this interview? I said, well, if you don't want, don't read it. Like, it's simple as that, right? Or whatever that is, right? It's like, oh, why are you wearing this? Why are you eating that? Like, people will always have that. So I think don't sit there analyzing, but do's are listen, and listen well. So don't ask the same question. Or somebody might be saying something about, like, hey, I've been maybe going through something, I wanted to talk to you, and just listen. And listening intently and asking only questions when it feels appropriate, right? Open-ended questions are always a good thing, right? Like, as opposed to a coming from a place of empathy instead of a place of judgment. And some of the don'ts are, don't ever ask someone, even if you think, because sometimes, no matter the stereotypes that the media or the entertainment world or whatever puts it, right? Like, oh, boys play sports, girls play dance. Does that mean that the others don't exist? Men go to work, women cook. I mean, hello, 2023. Like, these are just baffling stereotypes and labels that that are put out there, which are absolutely not true by any means. So don't ever ask someone. I remember there were people who I know will ask or wonder. I'm like, I never will ask anyone ever. If they want to share, that's their thing. It's not your business to ask anyone, right? I think that's such a disrespectful thing. So don't ask. Do also ask how they can help. Like, if you are someone who is a good friend, a relative, what can they do? Sometimes that could just be an ally, a support of, maybe when they are telling their friends or someone, they need somebody else to be there for them and, go through the motions. Another don't is, if someone is trusting you with some information or telling you that, don't go out that person or go share their intimate details, whatever that is, with other people, because it's each person's own journey and news to share. So it's like, if someone gets engaged, if someone is proposing someone, you won't go post that on social media, right? It's their news to share. So I think just being, again, respectful. So be respectful, be empathetic, be a good listener. If you're not sure about some of these things, Raksha and many organizations have lots of resources for both people who are going through it, the different terminologies for parents to understand and know how to be in a situation like that. Because when you go into it with a growth mindset, don't go into the victim mindset, no matter where you are, whether you're the person that's sharing your story or the person that's receiving it. So much to learn and grow in this world, not play the victim card. I mean, look, we all have so many things to continuously learn and grow and evolve. And yeah, I hope someday there isn't a coming out today. It's just, I use a right hand and left hand analogy. If someone is right-handed or left-handed, do we even care or pay attention? No. So why should this be any different, right? So I think it's as simple as that. It's a way of life. It is a way of life, and it's as normal and will hopefully be as accepted as everything else. Because this is not if you look at the temples in India for thousands of years ago, and the sculpture and the scriptures, there's so many things that we should learn from our history and not take steps backward. I think we should continuously grow, evolve, and if you don't know something, it's don't just say, oh, I think, some people, it's easy to blame religion or it's easy to blame this. Find a way to learn from it. Whether you agree with it or not is fine. It's like pro guns, anti guns, pro abortion. Two people can disagree, understand, but still have a healthy adult dialogue. And that's absolutely fine, right? We're not going to all agree on everything. But I think disrespect comes when you are judging and giving people unsolicited advice in anything, but specifically this, on places that is not your business, right? Who made you the expert? And vice versa. That's like, no one is going to find that respectful.
So speaking of, What are the most challenge? What for you personally? What was the most challenging part of your journey? Something that a non-LGBTQ person would, let's say, not be aware of at all. And
I think the most difficult part is until you share your story, I think you're always playing straight. And I think that's the challenge.
I can
And every incident or situation becomes like, oh, are they testing me? Are they wondering? Like all these mind games that you end up playing. And it probably isn't, but you probably, and I've read some of these, I love reading self-help books. And a lot of it says, a lot of the problems and the worries that we have are in our mind. They don't actually exist. So I think that is definitely a challenge. I think also parental/family pressure about, finding a partner, finding a person, children, all those dialogues come in. I'm like, listen, I understand where that comes from, but just because you have someone, it doesn't mean they're in a healthy relationship. So I think there's all these nuances that come along with it. But again, the optimist in me believes that when the right time and the right things happen, they happen organically.
Yeah.
So looking at the glass half full and glass empty, even in the South, I think this is an interesting. My coworkers were great, I remember this was my birthday weekend. I believe it was 2021.
Mhm.
Yes, 2021, October 18th, which is my birthday.
Oh.
I'm a Libran. You're a Libran also, right?
Yes,
Yes,
September. Yep.
yes,
That's
I remember. Um, and I think it's like, what can you do with what you have where you are now? I think
right.
that's a good question we should all ask. What can you do right now with what and who you have? And for me, I was like, I work in the media, and this is instead of looking at it, as I said earlier, as a flaw, I'm like, look at it as a gift to be able to help and share, and sort of not trying to be the poster child, right? Not trying to be the Gandhi or the Mother Teresa, whatever. But what can you do? And I think when you are able to, we all learn through stories. I think that's the reason why I love the jobs that I do, because they're all connected with two things: stories and people.
Yes.
Stories about people, by people, for people, whether you know helping them with the news, understanding what's happening in the world, whether it's the improv or acting world where you're portraying a story because it's happened to teach a lesson. I think that's the energy that I derive from, right? So find that. I think find what you can, and maybe if you're in a there's so many options now with social media. There's apps. There's ways to connect. There's Instagram content, where people are being able to post. So the more vulnerable and you let people in, the more you get out of it. So I think it's the more gratitude and gratefulness you have, life gives you more reasons to.
So did you feel, so what was it like for you to finally come out? Do you think things have changed since you openly came out? Has the pressure been off? What is the difference do you
It's a
feel?
relief for sure, because I think that's, it's, I like saying it, it's like an escape room. You open one lock and there are still many more to open, which is okay. But I think the main, it's like, oh, at least it's a big step, and it's a relief in that sense. So I think that's, I would say, a good word. Also over the pandemic, I would just say, right, most of us have been evaluating choices that we make in life, whether it's our job, career, relationships, anything, right? So yes, I think in that way it's just been much more freeing and having a sense of freedom. And as I said earlier, you're not playing somebody, you're being that person. So that definitely helps. And I always say, just look at life as a step. I live my life through positive quotes and motivational quotes, and it works for me. May not work for everybody, but when you find inspiration and you can draw from it and you live it, it does help you stay optimistic and stay focused. So I say, look at one step at a time. Okay, you've done this, and then what is the next step? And then what's the next? It's like school. You do first grade, second, and then like when you're in first grade, you don't ask, oh, what are you going to be the CEO of? Like, you have no idea, right? Same thing. Like, so when you start your life, you look at it one envelope at a time to be able to open, and that'll lead to something else. And I think that's just really it. I don't think it's not really rocket science.
Did you see any difference with people before, the same person before and after? Or was it more about you than what you felt from the outside world, the difference?
I think it was more about me, because sometimes you feel a level of guilt, right? I'm like, oh, I don't want to feel like I'm misrepresenting this, or bending the truth and things like that. So I think really most if not all were supportive. Again, the ones who were, I mean, especially as I said, there are people who are trolls on social media who will write things, and you cannot please them, and you cannot do something if someone doesn't agree, and that's okay. But no, I would just say it's more of a personal spiritual growth for your
More
own self.
about you, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think it changed anything, right? right? I don't think you can still be religious and be this, right? Or you can still be what you want to do in this. I don't think that changed anything. I think it just gives you a little bit more sense of fueling your purpose and adding that extra tool that you have to be a little bit authentic with who you want to be, right? Because we're all, no one goes from 0 to 100, right? There's layers to all of our emotions and personalities. So I think that helps.
Absolutely. So, talking about normalizing, the conversation about LGBTQ community itself, we've come a long way, but, and you're an actor, right? So, and, we've ever since Will and Grace,
Sure.
sitcoms have sort of actually helped a lot in that direction. So what is your view on the influence of art sort of normalizing these conversations?
I think art plays such an important role in everyday life, especially in the pandemic we've seen, right? We've seen people are drawn towards entertainment, TV, movies, OTT platforms. We miss theater, we miss plays, books. So many art forms exist. And I think art can help influence life.
Yes.
And I think that's an important element. So especially in the South Asian diaspora and the Indian American culture, when we have more stories about topics like, when we saw Thappad about, abuse, when we saw Chandigarh Kari Ashiki about transgender, there's so many untold stories. At some point, the old formula of girl meets boy, boy meets girl, happily ever after, even though that's, tale as old as time, there needs to be other news stories that do exist and that do happen, that only cinema and television propel it further. I think Made in Heaven has done a good job. There's so many new generation of content creators and writers, and I think when art can influence that, it helps open up our mind. I think when I saw the Fame game, Madhuri, her son is gay, and she talks about that. I think that's how we normalize it in everything, not just LGBT, but divorce, abuse, career, being single, whatever that is, right? I think there's so many elements of being a human being that we sometimes forget that not everybody's cookie cutter. It's like saying not everybody wants the same type of food. We all are different palates and different appetites. But I think when we're able to learn and grow and see that through the medium of art, I think that's important. So yeah, go out and watch more movies, go out and watch plays, read books, and enlighten and empower yourself. When we think about thousands of years ago, that's how they did that. It's not how they did that only; it's also how we can do it now. There are so many. I don't want to say ill. There's so many areas of growth that we can have, and by opening up our mind and horizons, by reading papers, publications, content from other perspectives, even if it's not your own, you do realize that. So I certainly do hope that more movies are being told about the LGBT, more TV shows about so many untold stories. I think that will create a brighter future for everybody, and especially set the tone for the next generation to be more loving, accepting. And I think they're already on that path. I don't think, when you see, I think for a lot of people who are younger, I've seen people in India who are married trapped because of what the societal pressures are. And to me, that's sad. It's unfortunate. I'm like, I'm so thankful that I live here. That is not an option. That's, you don't think about that. But I think if art can propel emotions to be better and show a realistic element of society, we see that, right? Padman. So many other, like, I think Akshay Kumar is a poster child for these type of movies, right?
Yeah.
Like the having toilets. So many things that do exist in India. It's not all Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum and Devdas. Those are nice getaways, but that's not what.
Yes.
That's not the only element of stories that need to be told. So I
True.
do love those movies, but I'm just saying, like there's so many other things that also are important.
Yes. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about vulnerability, historically, and especially prior to the June 2020 Supreme Court decision affirming the LGBTQ workers, they're protected from discrimination and civil rights Act of 1964. Invisibility really meant, inclusion and safety, right? Whereas if you were visible, it could lead to exclusion, right? And sometimes not maybe in the more metropolitan cities, but also physical danger. So sometimes, despite all of the progress, sometimes it still feels unsafe, right? To make decisions and sort of come out in the open. Did you ever feel vulnerable that way?
I think it's that way. I guess I've always, maybe because I'm an extrovert, I've just sort of been comfortable sharing. So vulnerable in the sense of, yes, it's a lot because you don't want to be disrespectful or upset anyone, especially, family members and things like that. But I made it a point to tell each person on my own. I didn't want them to read about it or about it on a social media post to the best of your ability. So I think, again, coming from a place of respect, but in terms of vulnerability, I think it's important that everyone finds those people or opportunities to share your vulnerable side instead of putting up the guard. Because we put the guard up because of a place of fear. And when we shed those fears and inhibitions, you get to really see who you really are. Who is Jyotsna? Who is Archith? And I think that's much more beautiful to see someone's imperfect beauty than their makeup touched up, Instagram filtered version. Because listen, that's an extension of who you are. There's nothing wrong with it. When we go to a wedding or we go to a thing, we all like to dress up and show up as our best self, but that's not how we always are. Right? How are you when you wake up? And how are you when the lights are off? How are you at home? How are you when things are bad?
The ones that are around, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's equally as important to be as vulnerable. But I think pandemic propelled a little bit more vulnerability. I don't think I was not. I think it added a little more of an accelerated push. But I think, when so many people, and I genuinely feel like you only learn by storytelling, which is why all the things that I do are intentional. But I think if you want to interview someone and get to know their story, you have to be willing to share your own story.
Absolutely.
You cannot just be asking people questions without giving your own depth. It's like saying, oh, you should really do this with your career, and you should do this, and you should do that. Well, what are you doing with yours? Unless you are extremely comfortable with that. And even then, if you are, that's great. Share that win as well. Vulnerability doesn't mean loss or bad thoughts or negative thoughts. I think it just means giving people the key to open up your door and letting them inside. And who you choose to is up to you, right? I think now with social media, we have a little bit more of a wider and broader reach. Obviously, talking to the media and sharing our story. The press is also beautiful. Not everybody may want to do that. That's perfectly fine. Find your inner circle, the friends, the people in your life that you want to, and have a little bit more of those in-depth, meaningful conversations. And trim the small talk. Small talk is for people you don't know. So when you meet up with your friends, when you're celebrating holidays, and I'm just going a little broader than the topic, understand the significance. Like we recently had Makar Sankranti, Pongal, all of it. It's not about just eating and dressing up and taking pictures. Know why it's done, the significance, and go into a little bit more. That is also vulnerable. And when you're having discussion with your friends, go a little bit more in depth to understand and listen. Not think about this, right? We just say, oh, hey, what's up? How are you? Great. How are you? Great. What did I get out of that? Nothing. As opposed to listening, like, yeah, I know it's your first day back at your job this week after being on maternity leave. I have a friend of mine who was going back. Wish them luck. Ask them how that was. A little bit more of a layer of empathy and listening and remembering. Oh, you just recently, I know you wanted to, add this skill set to this year. How is that going? How can I help? Maybe can I come join you? Things like that, I think, add a little bit more of showing that you're a good listener and really embodying those qualities. But it's also letting yourself be vulnerable. And for instance, I will share this one. I've always wanted to learn dance, and I started that this year. I said, let's just go do it. Just for the fun of it, I started Kruti, and I'm starting a dance 101, doing both Bollywood and Western, just for fun, for no rhyme or reason. It's something that I've always wanted to. And as you said, evolving personality, I said, I want to do it because I just think it'll bring me a goal, something to look forward to, and push myself a little bit more. That is also vulnerability, right? Vulnerability is not just always sharing, it's also going and doing, learning new things and evolving as a person.
Awesome. This the other thing that we talk about is also being really authentic. Yes, it took a while for you to sort of accept who you are, and but in workplaces and other more, let's say, conservative environments, it's hard for the LGBTQ community to be sort of authentic and sort of be accepting. But how important do you think it is? How does authenticity matter really? And what do you think are the risks of really being that way?
Being able to share with the repercussions.
Yes.
Right? I would say, depending on how old you are, where you are, and what you do, I think that's everyone's individual question. But I would say for someone who's a working adult or a young professional, sometimes when you strip off the Band-Aid earlier, it's much easier than tap dancing around it. So if you want to just, you go to New Jersey, and now obviously I just say it. So it cuts all the history out, especially if it's someone that's new. Yes. Instead of being like, let me just tell you, once upon a time. I think depending on where you are, if you're younger and maybe you're, especially in the high school, college world, where there's a little bit more of a, you know, could be cliquish, and peer pressure and things like that, knowing when and what to say. But I think the risks are always, the bigger the risk, the bigger the reward. So sometimes sharing something earlier on and being comfortable with it also shows your own level of confidence and can inspire other people to be also vulnerable and confident with you and trusting. And maybe you don't want to tell everybody. Maybe you have a few close people that you trust and say, and maybe share with them. I think that's fine. The risk, at least I don't think I've had any, I don't know about any risks. I would think it's just more of the validation from, like close people. But for the most part, as I said, 98% has been pretty good. 2%, someday I want to write a book. So they'll be reading about their stories in my book. Again, not like, I don't want to say it like, it's not like in a bad thing, right? I think it's just everyone is in a different space in life. And I think you have to know where you are and when to share that. And that's about it. So as you know, I write my motivational quotes, Archith, never about a person or people. But sometimes, like Taylor Swift writes music about her ex-boyfriends. I write motivational quotes about things that have
I've read
happened in
your
my life.
quotes. You're pretty good, actually, Archith. You're pretty
Thank
good.
you. And it's not out of anything, but it's sometimes a reminder for myself to be like, I went through this and that's okay. And that's really why I think it's therapeutic. It's like my own form of journaling. So whatever that is for you, maybe that's for you as dancing, maybe that's for you as singing, maybe that's for you as working out. Find ways to manage your emotional intelligence. I think that is equally as important. And a lot of that time comes with self-reflection time. And for me, that's exercising and yoga and just being away from my phone, being away from people, and just reflecting and marinating. And like it's like your phone. Your phone charges at night. I put off my phone, no screens. It needs time to reset and reboot, just like your brain and your mind does. Your soul needs that energy to be able to show up as your 100%, because otherwise, we will get drained, and that's when some of the frustration and anger and things like that.
All right, Archith. So you are really a role model to the Indian American community in many ways. It's not just about this, but having changed, your career at a very key successful. Well, you were already on a successful path, but you chose, let's say, the path less traveled, and you are where you are today. And there's a lot of motivation for youngsters to look forward to here. So what is the message and hope, you want people to take away from your story or your legacy, so to speak?
Oh, I don't know about words like legacy, but thank you. That's so sweet of you. And I actually am going to quote, I read this recently. It was M. Keeravani who did they won for RRR. And I thought this was a nice little, the way it was tied up. And it said basically, everybody has a talent or two or three, so many skills and talents we all have. And the biggest regret or shame is not being able to share that with the world. For example, he's an amazing composer who created a song, Not To, which won a Golden Globe, which is phenomenal. To think that an Indian, South Indian, not even Bollywood, so showing that there are other industries and being able to share them on a speech. So I say, let's draw some inspiration from that, and knowing that each and every one of us has at least, I would say, three, if not more, at least three things that we are really, really good at. So as we, look into this year and, the months ahead, maybe write it down. What are the things that people say about you? You naturally know what you're good at and enjoy doing, right? So I think finding those skills and strengths and turning that into a greater gift for the world and the legacy of humanity. This past weekend, I interviewed an activist and an actress who spent time with Martin Luther King, and she had a beautiful quote. She said, on your deathbed, what is a legacy you want people to remember you by? The houses you have, the money you left, the clothes you wore, or how you made people feel, the impact you had on humanity. She has started Hosea Feed the Hungry in Atlanta, a nonprofit feeding homeless people in Atlanta. So that legacy lives on. And her father, Hosea Williams, worked with Martin Luther King. So we all have so many things that we can do. So look at the problems in the world and where you can be the solution for that puzzle, and or create something. And there's so many things to do and to be done. So maybe your strengths are writing, socializing, dance, singing. There's so many artistic elements. Well, whatever that is. Maybe it's public speaking. So I think when you find out who you are, be good at it, enjoy it, and find a way to impact the world. I think as simple as that. So I think that's what I would still am inspired by, and I hope other people also get inspired. So be who you are, tell your own story, be kind and be a good human being, and always keep growing. It's not about the end journey. It's about getting to those little steps along there before you get to that end of the staircase. And then when you look back, when you're 90 or 100, you can be like, you know what? Wow, what a beautiful ride I had, as opposed to living and to be like, oh, I didn't do anything. Like, and it's, as I said, never too late to start anything in your life. When I took the dance classes this week, some people said people who are in their 80s are coming. And I think if you really want to go for something, go do it. No one's going to give you that pen except you have to start. So to the young people, to the not so young people, to the young, old, anybody, right? Live your life on your terms, be nice and be authentic, and just find ways that you can drive your purpose by using your own talents. So Jyotsna, for example, right? I loved hearing about when you used your own personal story about being a mom and being able to share your story vulnerably and writing for NRI Pulse and being a community activist. That's what people are going to, and for Jyotsna did not pay me for this. I will share this quickly. The most nicest, kindest human that I've met. You're so always, there's a beautiful line of being passionate, following up, but doing your work well, and it shows through. So you're an example of it, using your own background story to shape the world, and I love that. So I think we all have that within us, right? We look at it. It's not everybody can become an Amitabh Bachchan or even needs to be an Amitabh Bachchan or a Shah Rukh Khan. We can all channel our own superheroes, right? Whatever that is. Maybe you love cooking. Maybe you love whatever. Find out what you really love. Share it with the world. It's as simple as that. So, and for me, it's being able to tell stories and learn from people and be inspired by people. So that's what I really, really.
Well, thank you, Archith. Thank you so much for talking to us.
My pleasure. Thank you, NRI Pulse, as always. Fun little plug right before I moved to end the game show. I think a lot of my pivotal moments in my life, I feel like NRI Pulse has been there along the journey with me. And of course, you always will. But I remember that. I was like, again, you remember those specific things where I think, man, covered that when I moved to India to work for Zee, when I won the game show, and then, now this. It's always like, you guys have played an integral part of my growing up. So someday I'll look back and let me just go back and look at all the articles that NRI Pulse did about my journey. And
well, now they're online, so they're there forever.
They're there forever. They're whether people like it or not.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Well, wish you all a wonderful 2023. And as I said earlier, have one life, go live it beautifully, and if you do it well, once is more than enough.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Archith, and we wish you best in all the endeavors. I know there's more coming where
we'll be writing more stories, right? Yeah,
exactly. So we'll be there at all the key points in your life.
I love it. Always invited, always welcome, and thank you again. My biggest gratitude, NRI Pulse. Everybody, please make sure you follow NRI Pulse, subscribe to them on all the social media platforms. As we mentioned, the articles are online. So if you have a friend who maybe is not here in Atlanta, Georgia, share them article. They're a great publication, and Jyotsna, Veena, and team are amazing people who really put a lot of dedication and soul to tell these stories of Indian American, the immigrant voices of the 2000s and beyond. So please share them some light and love as well, and let's all tell amazing stories. And happy 2023.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, Archith.